When knitting your ferrule pattern, you're going to have to use a ferrule chart. And if you've not used a chart before, then there's a few things to look at before you start knitting. Charts are read from the bottom to the top, following the direction of your knitting, and you're then able to see the pattern evolve as you work through the rounds. Each square on the chart represents one stitch. And in this chart, the main colour is represented by the dark squares and the contrasting colour by the light squares. Each horizontal row represents a round, and the numbers running up the side of your chart give you the number of rounds that you'll have to complete for the ferrule pattern. In this chart, we have to complete 19 rounds for the pattern. In some patterns, you'll see the numbers are written on the right and left for right side facing knit rows and wrong side facing purl rows. But because we are knitting in the round, we're always knitting with the right side facing us, and every round we're going to do is a knit round. So therefore all the numbers are written up on the right of your chart. When reading the squares, you always read from the right to the left. So if you're looking at round 1, you'll start reading this square in this corner and read across to the left side, and then round 2 from here to from the right across to the left. Below the chart there is an indication showing us how many stitches are needed for the stitch repeat, and this one is a 12 stitch repeat. So you work your way across your 12 stitches, and when you come to the end of those 12 stitches, you then repeat the pattern by going back to the beginning of those and working across. We've got 96 stitches all together in our hat pattern, so we will be repeating this 12 stitch repeat 8 times. So now let's look at our knitting. I've already completed the main ferrule pattern, and I'm now ready to just do the zigzag section at the top of the chart from round 14. As I explained, the squares represent a stitch. So I'm at the beginning of my round. So my first stitch I can see is a light coloured square, so I'm going to use my contrasting colour. As with the seeding stitches, I'm going to keep my main colour at the top and my contrasting colour yarn below. So the first stitch is one square using my contrasting colour. The next square is a dark square, so I'm using my main colour for one square. Then reading across, I can see I've got 1, 2, 3 contrasting colour. So that's 3 contrasting colour stitches. Then again, looking across, always reading from right to left, 1 dark square. Then 3 light squares. One dark square. And finally 2 white squares to complete the 12 stitch repeat. So I've worked my 12 stitches, and already I can see how the squares on the chart are representing the stitches in front of me. So I can see where the dark square corresponds to the dark stitches I have in my knitting. So I've finished that first row of stitches, so I now need to go back to the beginning and carry on again with the same pattern. So 1 stitch contrasting, and now one of my main, and then I can see, actually without looking at the pattern because it's very repetitive this round, I'm going to do 3 contrasting colours. Now, an important technique when you're knitting ferrule is carrying the yarn behind at the back of your work. And at the back you can see you have these loops which are carried behind the stitches when you're not using them, and those loops are called floats. So when I'm knitting my contrasting colour, the main colour is resting before, and now when I'm ready to knit it, I'm going to carry it across the back, ready to knit the next stitch, and that is called a float. And it's important when you're working a float not to pull it too tight, so you end up bunching up your stitches and making the tension too tight, but also not making it too loose and loopy. So you just want to make sure you get a good balance and the tension nice and even so that all your floats sit neatly at the back. On some patterns, you might find that you have to do a long succession of one colour, and therefore your alternating colour has to be taken around the back for a long float. If it's more than 5 stitches, then you would then weave in. But with this pattern, the most stitches we have of one colour is 5 at a time, and so then I'm just using that as a long float being carried at the back to keep this a simpler pattern. So then carrying on, I'm just going to keep going with the pattern repeat, which is 3 contrasting and then 1 main colour all the way round until I've completed the round and I've got back to my marker. And you can see how the pattern is very regular all the way through, and then I'll be ready to work on round 15 and continue up the chart.